Thank you, thank you. It's very good to be here again. This is my, I guess, fourth session moderating this, which is kind of fun. I like these types of events that immix puts on. They're not the big 300 people in a big ballroom. I think it's a little more intimate. Allows you to kind of connect a little bit better, I think, with some of the panelists and have a little bit better, honest dialogue about what's going on in the market space. But we'll open this up with introductions. Each panelist here that I introduce, we'll let them speak for 5 minutes or so about what they care about, what they're working on, some of the issues that they think might be important for you. And then we'll get into some other topics around cloud and security and mobility, so kind of the big three that most people are paying attention to. And then we'll open it up for your comments and your questions at the end of that, and we'll get you out of here at a reasonable time. But thanks again for allowing me to do this, and thanks for coming today. We're going to go down the row here. I'm going to start off by introducing somebody you probably know pretty well, Mr. Barry West. He's currently the Chief Information Officer of the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. He came there back in March of 2013. And before that, he was with 5 years in the private sector, at VP for SC Solutions, an integrator here in town. Prior to that, he was Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Commerce, and maybe I'll stop there and let you take it away. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Scott. Good morning. How's everybody? Good. Just want to take 5 or 10 minutes, talk about some of the things we're doing, but just first off, I think the key topics of this morning are really important, and I think those of you in business and having just come out of the private sector, I think they're probably the hottest topics as far as disruptive technologies that are out there. And when you look at IT convergence and you look at such things as mobility and cloud computing and the whole social media and social collaboration and information, specifically around big data, the four of those coming together along with IT security kind of being the horizontal that's embedded, I think it's really key for the next several years. I mean, those are going to be, I think, the key technology. So it was really good to see the topics that we're going to be focusing on here today. And all those technologies being disruptive are at different phases and places. Some have been out much longer than others. And the key is, how do you leverage those as a government agency? And from the industry side, how can you find your niche and how can you get in there and really be able to help government as we try to drive from a speed and money perspective in trying to bring things to fruition within a budget that's really been cut back. Some of our key initiatives at the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, first off, we hadn't had a IT strategic plan in probably 5 to 7 years, so that's something we've been working on since I arrived. We plan to have a draft issued by the end of next month and actually have something posted by the end of the calendar year. But that's really going to be key for me. It's not going to be shelfware. It's actually going to be our key initiatives that come out of that. So those of you that have that account, my agency, I definitely recommend you take a look at that strategic plan. It's going to be really focused around business, and out of that are really going to be some of the key initiatives that we're going to be focusing on from a tactical and operational standpoint. Moving SharePoint to the cloud, we're right now in the process of going through that. Should be a solicitation coming out probably in the next 6 to 8 months around SharePoint. We'll then move into email and collaboration tool as well for the cloud. IT security is a key topic, and I spent a lot of my time since arriving on security. We've got 3 material weaknesses at the corporation. 2 of those fall within my shop and the CIO shop, so I'm under the spotlight right now and getting those cleaned up, cleared. We will be bringing in the CSAM tool from the Department of Justice. That's the Cyber Security Assessment Management tool. It's a GOTS product as a service. We'll be using that as a central repository to really house all of our POAMs and a lot of our documentation. Right now we haven't had anything like that, so that'll be a good start for us. Also, the CDM program out of DHS, the Continuing Diagnostic and Mitigation Program, we're definitely going to be leveraging that. And my thought process is cloud first. What can I do? Can I leverage cloud? As new initiatives come along, or as we re-engineer, how can I leverage cloud? And the cut, save, and reinvest, what you keep hearing out of OMB, that's really what we're looking to do. From an industry perspective, and I know my time's almost up here, I would recommend, try to be as agile as you can, moving quickly. Try to be as innovative as you can when you bring solutions to the government. Know who your customer is and the programs. I still have industry coming in and saying, well, what keeps you up at night? I mean, when you come to see a government executive, know their programs, know what they do, have some thought process behind it before you arrive at their door. Find ways to save government money. That's what we really want to hear. We want to hear innovative solutions that can save us money quickly. And also, security, I can't emphasize enough how that's going to continue to grow, and it will have funding. I mean, we're still seeing, out of all the cutbacks, security is still an area that's going to continue to grow. And find your niche. And I know when I was in this private sector, that's what you really have to find, is finding that niche at what you're good at and leveraging it and partnering with good partners that you can trust.
Very good. Thanks, Barry. Next up, Chase Garwood. He joins SBA after a decade or so of serving Department of Homeland. After that career, or during that career, I guess he was involved from the very beginning, really, has been the leadership team for DHS components and programs. Prior to joining SBA, he was CTO for U.S. Visit, focusing on emergent identity and biometric solutions. Also served CIO for National Protection Programs Directorate, where he's responsible for IT policy programs for all component and operations. Take it away, Chase.
So it's been very interesting. I've been at SBA for about a year now, a little over a year at the Small Business Administration, and having been at Homeland Security for 10 or 11 before that with big budgets, big programs, there's definitely been a shift of shaving off a few zeros, which has been very healthy for me to do, hate the term do more with less, but be creative. So SBA has got a great mission, and there's a lot of small businesses in this room, I know. So it's how do we do fundamentals, but then also be creative and continue to deliver not only to the agency, but to our constituencies, which is, small businesses, entrepreneurial development, et cetera. So I've been in multiple roles, from operational CIOs to CTO to program managers and whatnot. So it tends to be able to, I can talk various languages, hopefully, to my customers. So at SBA, and Barry kind of hit, I'll hit some of the same things that Barry just kind of hit. SBA, as a small agency, we're leveraging everything that we can. We do a lot of shared services with other agencies, so we also are using some of DOJ and DHS programs. We're leveraging things out of Treasury and Commerce, NFC, others. Everything that we can, we're looking to not recreate the wheel. So if we can use a shared service with somebody else for some fundamentals like our CSAM tool or the Continuous Diagnostics Program, or we can leverage WebTA. I mean, some basic fundamental things that we're not homegrowing and we're not expending our limited and smaller budgets on doing that. So that's also, I'm looking at cloud first, and exactly for that. Why am I hugging the box? Why do I have my own Active Directory and Exchange servers and all these boxes and whatnot, which I have limited staff, limited skill sets, and limited budget? So we're a little behind some of the curve here, but we're also in a planning cycle for looking at email as a service from some of the GSA offerings, offloading that into managed services. We're starting to do fundamentals. Again, focus has been on security for a big part, especially SBA. We have a lot of financial and credit and capital investments flowing through the agency, so cybersecurity is vitally important. So we continue to look at continuous diagnostics, continuous monitoring, patch management, configuration management, just a lot of fundamentals that we're looking at to keep in place. SBA is also very interesting as a small agency, and I've learned a lot in the last year since joining the team. It's a very distributed workforce. We're all over the country. We have regional offices and standard district offices type of thing, but we also have a very mobile workforce that are out there with the businesses, with our community, with the international trade folks, and we're all over the place. So that's makes mobility more and more important just for my own workforce. We also have a big Office of Disaster Assistance that works with FEMA and recovery, like after Sandy, for example. So mobility is very important for us, not only from an infrastructure standpoint, but applications. So we're continuing to look at mobile applications. How do we move into that space just for our own business purposes? But then also, how do we provide data and how do we provide applications to our small business community to leverage and others? So example, the DSBS database and other things, searchability of things to find out, who are the small businesses that can provide a service for X contractor or an X need. So we're looking at continuing movement in that. And for me, all these fundamentals that I'm kind of focused on, as usual, as any deputy CIO or acting CIO, you got to take care of the bread and butter. But what I'm teeing up for 14, we talked about big data a little bit. I'm just looking at data. Big data may be coming next for us, but just data and data programs and enterprise architecture within the agency, tying on to Barry a little bit, it really is kind of strategic planning and those frameworks on what is the data that SBA has. How are we leveraging it? How are we utilizing it? And how can we expose that data for others to use? Not to jump on the data.gov bandwagon, but it really is provide that innovation and provide that opportunities that others can just access the data. And I think SBA has done a really great job over the last few years of doing more web services and web-based type of things, very customer focused, which again, coming from DHS in the world that I was in was a little bit different shift. I'm like, oh, we're internet based. Okay, we're web services, applications, good. So I'll be focusing a big push for a data program within SBA and how can we better leverage that, utilize that, and that's not just the technical, NEAM or XML schemas, and that's all good, fine and good. But what's our data stewardship? What's our data models? All those good things. So I think the other thing that we are going to be looking at, and I won't talk too much about it because I know Luke and others will, but when we talk mobility and we talk data and all these things, and we're always talking about cybersecurity, but in that mobile space, we have, I'm so used to grabbing my lanyard, we have our HSPD 12 or PIV or PIV-I cards or whatnot, and moving into mobile space, I can't afford sleds and dongles and other things, right? I mean, I already can barely afford the device just from the budgets that I have. So how, from a cybersecurity angle, do we secure in a mobile space, right? Is it derived credentials? Is it biometrics with facial or voice and other things, natively? What's the next generation that we can leverage without having to procure and provision and do more things onto the belt of the workers? That and mobility of, we have telecommuting, those other mobile things. So again, more and more that we can leverage, not having to have, I have a laptop and I'm tethered and I have to have all these things in order to securely access my work. So all those things are kind of what we're looking on. And then we can look at fun, cool things in the future, augmented reality and all those good things. That stuff will come. I like to think about that in my spare time, but that's we're looking at bread and butter things in the next couple of years at SBA. So
Very good. Thanks. Next up, Luke Berndt. He's the Program Manager for Homeland Security Advanced Research Projects Agency, working with Cybersecurity Division in the Science and Technology area. He manages a diverse range of programs and efforts. The Experimental Testbed Program focuses on providing a secure testbed for cybersecurity research, improving the security of internet routing, and addressing protocols for the goal of the Secure Protocols Program. There's a lot of protocols there. Take it away, Luke.
A lot of protocols. Let's see. This on now? I think so. So good morning, I'm Luke Berndt. I'm in the Science and Technology Directorate at DHS, and we're sort of the nerdy group in there. And we have some good partners inside government. We're, similar to DARPA or NSF. The difference is we're really focused on transition. We have to make sure the stuff we develop gets out there, gets in the hands of people, and that's really how we're graded. And we're also strictly focused on unclassified work. So we're really trying to work out with commercial sector, work with academia, really interested in trying to bring the best ideas in and then get them in the hands of what we call the Homeland Security Enterprise. So one of the mission space for DHS is pretty large, so we want to help the the components inside DHS, ICE, Coast Guard, Border Patrol, but we really also want to help the broader critical infrastructure, so power plant providers, the financial market, transportation, and make sure they're equally as protected, because when it comes to a lot of the different Homeland Security missions, they're just as critical. I'm inside S&T, I'm in the cybersecurity group, and one of the new programs I'm helping stand up is on mobility. And it's a tough area to come at from government and also to be effective in government. It is moving extremely fast. For us to pitch an idea, get it funded, and get it out there and still have it be current is tough. Luckily, there's some tough challenges in there. So some of the research areas we're focusing on right now is, this is actually through a small business program, Small Business Innovative Research, a SIBR program. And it's a great way for us to work with smaller companies. We're focusing on what we call sort of hardware roots of trust. And that's how can you start putting and trusting the device so it has security baked in from the start. So essentially, so the other side too is we're looking at how can we validate and vet some of the software going on to the devices. We're taking sort of a dual prong approach when it comes to the research side of this. We're looking at what goes into the device and what the OS is running on. The OSs themselves are coming along really nicely. They're adding lots of security features in there quicker and more effectively than we probably could. But at the same time, the device manufacturers, we want to be sure that we're getting a clean device. And the software that goes on it, we want to know what's in it, where it came from, what it's trying to do, get a little better oversight into that. So when we're going through, so one of the fun things about S&T is we have a number of different ways to work. So one of them is the SIBR program. Another one is we actually are able to collaborate internationally. So when it comes to software vetting, we're actually working with the Dutch, who for some reason or another have become really good at looking at mobile devices, looking at the software they run, and being able to vet what's doing what. And as I was talking about earlier with the transition, we're really interested in also piloting this technology. So right now, DHS as a whole is really using BlackBerries. And it meets sort of the initial, it does what it was designed to do very well. It's great at email, it's great at calendaring. But we're really starting to see, from the components and, the people out in the field that they want more capabilities. They're used to more capabilities. They're used to having a map that tells them where they are and what's around them. And BlackBerry isn't as good at that, at least for the ones we have deployed right now. So we're on the cyber side, and we're looking at how we can do that securely. So we're working with our DHS CIO's office and our CISO's office to pilot a number of different solutions and get them out into operators' hands and find out how they're working. And then on the cyber side, see how well they're actually securing some of this data. And we're actually, one of the nice connections we have at S&T is a connection with InQtel. So we're able to leverage some of the R&D and investments being made in the intelligence community and try that on our civilian network. A lot of times, and I just want to give an amen out for that PIV problem, we're running into problems that we've created that government's going to have to solve, and PIV's a great example. It made tons of sense on a laptop and a desktop, and it's a great concept. You want to have secure certs and secure identity that's separate from your device, and it becomes challenging when you store it in a form factor that's about the same size as the device right now. And the sleds are a huge problem. They're, $300, most of the nice ones, and your device sometimes costs $300. So that's a heavy mandate right now, and it makes it tough to securely deploy and meet some of the mandates we have. So that's one of the areas we're going to be looking at down the road is, I think derived credentials is one of the big ones, and that's how you can take the secure information and then put it on a different form factor. But perhaps there's biometrics or other approaches to this. So that's one of the areas we're going to be focusing on, and it really would be great to have help from members of the audience, the broader commercial sector to help us solve this problem and come up with, here's a practical approach, here's something that will be viable in the market. So we're going to be deploying a pilot, looking at some of the MDM solutions, and a lot of what's driving this in our work with the CIO's office is the larger digital government initiative. And this was taken on by the CIOs across government to look at what are some of these forward-leading technologies. Out of that, they came up with a mobile device decision framework to help agencies sort of cope on what are the trade-offs here. Because this really is just a series of trade-offs. You can get better devices, you can get more capability, but you're trading off cost or security. So trying to find that right fit. And as part of that, they did an initial MDM security baseline. It's sort of taking the standard NIST security controls, trying to map them to the mobility space and the management space. And we're looking at, actually looking at products out there, mapping them to that and deploying it to see how well this baseline works in the real world for some paper. So on the broader topic, I wanted to throw out sort of my 2 cents on where mobility and cloud's going. And granted, I'm more in the ivory tower, less in the real world CIO world. So feel free to throw some rocks or tomatoes. But sort of where I see things are changing a lot is we're no longer in a world where there's a nice perimeter, where we own the network, our data's on the network, and everything's connected out. Right now, I think we're moving, I don't know if you want to, we'll go for the more geographical metaphor, but we're moving towards islands. I think we're going to have either little regional offices that are connected, or really, we might even move to every person's their own island, and you really have, your laptop, you have your device, and then you have some unknown connection back to where the data is stored. And I think, that probably has been a long time coming. As soon as we started having laptops and started undocking them and taking them to the airport and connecting through Starbucks, stuff got really crazy quickly. And I think we're still, in a lot of sense, trying to catch up with that and sort of change our models so we can actually start focusing on sort of the core elements, which isn't necessarily how do you control the device, how do you control the network. It's really how do you control the data. And starting to look at, how do you provide secure access between these 2 points, even if they're not in my hand, and how do I monitor that? What happens when you have an undocked laptop? And that's really why I'm actually really excited about mobile devices. I know I'm supposed to say, oh, they're so unsecure, the hackers are going to be listening to you, they're going to be using the camera. Maybe, but compare that to the Windows XP laptop I have on my desktop that's running, Acrobat. It's running Java. It has Flash on it. And it has, a microphone. What happens if I have that, in a taxi and I forget about it? It's going to be really hard to wipe that data, to wipe that laptop. Maybe they'll get on Wi-Fi. It could happen. But with this device, it has a baseband connection. It's connected all the time to a network. It's a lot easier to wipe it. So I think we've taken a lot of the lessons learned from doing desktop devices and baked them into these mobile devices. You need, for the most part, if everything's working right, you need to have signed software to get it to run. Everything runs in a sandbox. And everything gets updated 2 years or so because you get new devices on contract. So as opposed to having a 7-year-old Windows XP machine, you at least, have a 2-year lag and upgrade cycle. So for better or worse, things are moving pretty quickly. So I'm pretty excited. There's still work to be done for sure. We don't have a lot of the enterprise type control or enterprise management or monitoring that we need necessarily. But I think we've taken some of the lessons learned and baked them into this. So I'm excited, and we'll see where it goes.
Thank you.
My rant.
Curtis Levinson. Yeah, that was good. Curtis was selected in 2011 by NATO to represent the U.S. as a sole advisory subject matter expert on cyber defense for the Industrial Resources and Communications Services Group. He provides guidance to NATO on their cyber issues and specific NATO-related electronic communications, vulnerability, threats, and remediation. Take it away.
I couldn't have written that better myself. But, and why does the guy with the bow tie always go last? Come on. I mean, let's. Just about 2 weeks ago, I got a call from a headhunter. And I don't know why these people call me, headhunters call me, candidates call me. I don't know why I'm Matchbook Central. So the guy wants a cloud engineer with a minimum 10 years experience. I said, would you like to rethink that? And there's a point to saying that. And that's now, as a technologic society, we're using all kinds of terms, even though we're not really crystal clear what they mean. What does cloud mean? What does big data mean? No one has defined big data. And yet, if you go to RSA, everything is big data. So we find ourselves in a technologic world using all these terms we really don't understand. And if you look at the technology cycle, we've come full circle. And by explanation, in the late 1960s, early 70s, mid 70s, we had mainframes. We disparagingly called them big iron, like Harley Davidson. But we called them big iron. and we kept them in data centers, which we also disparagingly called brick and mortar. Okay. Well, the IBM PC came out in 1983. The Apple first type came out in 1982. By the late 80s, now brick and mortar and big iron is really bad. We're going to do client server. So we instead of having it all centralized in the bad bricks and the bad mortar, we put it out everywhere. And that wasn't so great either. So by the late 90s, we're going into this world of cloud, whatever that is. Only what cloud means is it's going back into data centers, it's going back into big iron, except now they're called servers. And the brick and mortar, we like that because it's secure. And we access cloud services via thin clients, which is IBM 3270 technology with full color and a mouse. So we've come in a large circle. We're exactly back where we started, with more intelligence, more tools, and still a lack of understanding about what we're talking about, which makes life at NATO complicated. NATO has 2 official languages, English and French. I can speak both of them, and none of them are helpful. I was just in a meeting a few months ago with 4 non-native English speakers. They were going on their 4th hour of trying to define the difference in English between constrain, meaning I grab you around, and restrain, I grab the back of your collar. To me, the words are easy. We're going into hour 4, and the room is sort of dark. We've got slides up, and the Belgians like things overheated. It's warm in the room. By hour 4, there's a clunk on my shoulder, and I look over, and it's the head of a Canadian lieutenant colonel. He bit the dust. Dave, wake up. So NATO is really divided into 2 groups. There is the 28, and this is NATO language. They talk about the 28, which are the 28 NATO members, most of whom don't like each other. So you've got Greece and Turkey who hate each other. We've got all kinds of other, NATO is no longer the Atlantic Alliance, now maybe it's the Mediterranean Alliance. It used to be, NATO is an outgrowth of World War II and the Allied occupation of Europe and the fall of Czechoslovakia to Soviet communism. Well, all of the former Warsaw Pact nations, save Russia, belong to NATO. So Poland is a member of NATO. And so we have the 28. And then there are the 50. Now, there are different rules for the 28 in terms of confidentiality, security clearances, and all those things. We have the 50. Those are the European Atlantic Partnership Coalition, which is anybody you can think of except Russia. So things are releasable either to the 28 or to the 50, or in meetings in Brussels, meetings are described as 28 plus 1 or 28 plus 2. And that means that there is a limit to what can be discussed in that forum. So NATO looking at cloud, I'm trying to help NATO acknowledge that there is another battlefield out there. They know all about the physical battlefield. Comrade Gaddafi got whacked. It was in all the papers. But they know about the physical battlefield. They know about troops and tanks and planes, ships off Somalia, pirate hunting. They do not know about cyberspace. And not only do they not understand the nature of cyberspace, they don't understand that cyberspace is also a battlefield. We recently had in Brussels CMX 12, Crisis Management Exercise, very creatively named. And 1 or 2 of the scenarios were indeed cyber scenarios. And they weren't very realistic. And this year I'm working to help frame those so they more reflect what a real world cyber attack looks like. But the first step for you to stop drinking is to admit you have a problem. The first step for NATO to understand and live in cyberspace is to understand there's this issue. And getting them to understand the issue is quite an effort. And Europe, if you look at the European landscape, there are two primary organizations. There's NATO, which is a military alliance, and the European Union, which is an economic alliance. But yet you have countries like Norway who belong to NATO but don't belong to the EU, and the other way around. So you can come to my country club, I am sure boycotting yours. So we've got all of these different components, and they are all, to use Luke's term, I'm going to steal it. No, but they're all islands of information. NATO, they don't know it, and I have a hard time telling them in English or French. And I can do one or the other. I could do a talk half in English, half in French. I cannot switch back and forth really well. At that point, it starts to get garbled. So NATO is looking at a cloud. NATO is a cloud. There is joint access to information in all of the bubbles, the islands of information, which are the 28, or in a larger sense, which are the 50. They're already in a cloud environment, and they don't know it. And when I try and tell them they're in a cloud environment, there's a level of confusion. But they're already doing it. And cloud technology, we talk about thin clients, we talk about big data. Each of the 28, let alone each of the 50, have differing levels of technology. Someone like Estonia is an extremely high-tech nation, extremely. After the Soviet Union had their big going out of business sale, tanks were going for cheap, and you could buy MiGs, anything. But the Baltics developed immediately into high-tech places. A huge amount of money was pumped in. When the Castro boys finally popped their socks in Cuba, a flotilla is going to leave Miami, and Cuba is going to become an instant WiMAX high-tech island within about a week. So Lithuania is completely wired. That enabled Russia in a cyber attack to just simply flip the off switch. On the other hand, Moldova is not wired at all. So cloud computing, how do we access these bubbles of information? And it's not just explaining what the landscape is, it's explaining to the Moldovans how they can acquire or utilize technology to get into NATO resources. The Estonians, they already have the NATO Cyber Center of Excellence in Tallinn. They're fine. And they don't agree with the Lithuanians on certain issues. So it's a lot of back and forth. The good word at NATO is consensus. And the bad word is anything else. That's two words. But anything other than consensus. So using English and French, and I tend to be a collaborator. So I go around and I meet with each individual, and then I get them in the room, and then none of them stay on their script, and it goes all to hell anyway. So NATO is a very challenging multilateral environment.
Very good. Thank you, Curtis. Let me start off with sort of more of a, I guess, a security question among the cloud and mobility kinds of issues. And this might be more addressed to Barry and Chase, but please, anybody jump in. When you have now cloud to look at and discuss and implement, and mobility is starting to grow, and you have your traditional security and how you've been managing that, is there a convergence now of how security is being managed within the agency? Is it a discussion that includes all these points, or is it still stovepiped within the agency when you're looking at the different security issues? And are different people responsible for security in those different buckets? How is it playing out in your agencies?
I'll go first. I think right now it's starting to change as a result of these technologies. It is creating a different mindset. You have things like FedRAMP that now are being leveraged from a security standpoint. So it's creating a different mindset. In some respects it's tougher because you have to get the business units on board, and they're working. You're working jointly with them, but you have to get them educated, and it's a lot of planning that needs to take place. So I'd say it is starting to change, but it's a slow change.
Now, and I'd agree. I think anytime we get inherent controls, from FedRAMP, or we do shared services. Why am I going to do a full ATO on X? Let me do just on this piece. I think that's a cultural shift within the CISO community. I think it's a cultural shift within the CIO and the business community. I think that the other thing that I'm seeing and also trying to push, it's not just paper compliance on CNA at the end. Much more security engineering and architecture at the front end, and whether that's leveraging inherited controls or other things, and not just NIST 853, but really not just spending all our time on paper and audit. I got plenty of auditors. I got IG and GAO and everybody all over me. So I think we're seeing a shift. I don't think it's there yet. I think it's a slow roll.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I'd add on to that is sort of that move to using the shared services, and I'm seeing that more and more both on the cloud side with FedRAMP, but also GSA's Mobility Center, where they're having pre-qualified MDMs that go through and at least gets you to a standardized baseline. If you are doing stuff with people's personal information, you might want to go a little higher than that, but at least does a lot of your homework for you, so you start off a few steps ahead. So I think we're seeing that on both sides.
And I've done loads and loads of FISMA work and been a corporate CISO over the years. To quote my friend Bruce Brody, who has gotten up on his soapbox, FISMA compliance does not mean secure. It doesn't. All it means is you're FISMA compliant. FISMA compliance can mean true security, but you have to work at it.
Yeah, FISMA does mean, less likely to get fired if things do go south. You at least, have some piece of paper saying you tried.
Well, a CNA letter basically says, "Don't shoot me."
Yeah. Yeah.
How well has the contracting community kept up with the changes with mobility and cloud and the security that overlays all of that? How would you kind of rate the contracting community or your vendors or your contractors that are supporting you? Is there any areas of that you believe that they need to spend a little bit more time and bring some more value?
Well, I think I'll deflect that question a little bit. Only not that necessarily deflect, but I think the other area that we need to focus on is and look, it's nothing against our contract officers and our procurement community, but it's really, quite honestly, from the vendor side, I see all sorts of interesting and approaches to it and willingness to do whatnot. But if the contract language says thou shall and the deliverable is X, Y, and Z, and we can't breach that, so we got to write better statements of work, statements of objectives, and whatnot. So I think that's really kind of what I've seen is needs to be the focus. Is again, it's that mythical unicorn of an IT professional procurement specialist type of thing, or a CISO procurement specialist,
Which is even worse.
Let's talk a little bit about mobility, since that seems to be a huge question mark here. I guess a couple things. How are you identifying funding to start to go mobile? There's no new money. Sequestration's pushing this back a little bit. Does this play into ROI analysis or going to cloud and reducing O&M? I mean, what's the process within your agency to reduce costs here to invest in mobility or invest in areas that, for whatever reason, need to happen within your agencies? But where's the money coming from for this technology change?
Yeah, well, great question. It takes money to start a lot of these initiatives, even to get, whether you're talking cloud, mobility, or what have you, you have to do some investment up front. And you have to be creative. You have to know how to move some money around. Obviously, every CIO should have a communications or comms budget, so you need to you have to be able to shift things around. Where can you get some seed money to get some prototypes started? That's really how I've seen things mature. Prototypes. I know, for example, Justice, for example, FBI, they've just went to the iPhone. They worked out a hell of a deal with BlackBerry in making that deal happen. Luke McCormick and his staff were able to really do some great negotiating. So it takes that type of thinking to really get a lot of these type innovations off the ground.
Well, I think some of the things, and I think Luke had mentioned it, as far as, again, not to jump on the bandwagon of OMB, but actually, the digital strategy and the digital efforts and portfolio stat, that's actually helped change, at least within SBA, some of our governance questions, right? So when we're doing portfolio of, we're doing the FY15 wrap rads. So as we're doing these budget cycles or investments are coming to the executive council across the agency, which is me, the CFO, the COO, the other heads of the business and policy organizations, part of the standard question is, should this, where's this going to be housed? Should this go cloud? What's the data? Can this be a mobile, can part of this investment to get some of the seed money, as Barry said, should this be mobile? If we're trying to deploy something or do something. And so those questions are at least starting to be asked, which I don't think they were really as a rigorous process in the last couple of years, and now that's starting to change on the business and the CFO side as well. Everybody's starting to see, hey, I don't need to refresh cycle. Why am I refreshing the desktops? Right? At least go to laptops, if not go to something else. Or hey, let me take part of that investment, get creative, and do a pilot or prototyping of X while I refresh some of my legacy. So I think it's that thought process.
Yeah, and we're definitely seeing the same thing. I think one of the things a declining budget has done is help people make friends to some degree. It used to be, a lot of components had enough money to go and do their own pilot. Now they probably don't. They have enough funds to do part of a pilot, so they have to go find someone else and partner with them. So it is helping people reach out and giving a reason to find friendships. And I think, touching on your point, we're seeing a lot of sort of mobile testing going on as the part of deployment of larger systems. So it's no longer, I'm just going to do a mobility pilot. It's now, I'm rolling out a new way to do, screening, the biometric screening. We should probably have some mobile terminals on smaller airports. Let's include a mobility component as part of that. So it's now where mobility isn't necessarily just a standalone thing. It's part of the larger system development and testing. So it's taking a little bit longer because you're not just doing let's replace and just how do we do calendaring better. It's like how do we actually do some of our core operational needs and capabilities better, and mobility is one of the ways they're looking at.
Since I'm the only one speaking from a multinational perspective, which is really kind of fun for a change, looking at the Eurocentric view of mobility, Europe is way ahead of us. They've been way ahead of us with portable technology, integrated phones and tablets. Europe has gone into IPv6. We may not do that within my lifetime. And particularly at NATO, they started with a BYOD policy, a bring your own device policy. In looking at the US federal budget issues, which I do get involved in, but there is no mobile budget at NATO. They just don't have one. They have a bring your own device policy, and they do not allow VPN access into the NATO network, into the NATO unclassified network, without extraordinary need. So most people can't VPN in. They don't use notebook PCs very much, so they don't go walking out the door. They use desktops, so work gets done in the office. Things aren't portable. So mobility-wise, they're doing an awful lot with very little, if no, budget. And how many of us have a really good bring your own device policy? We talk about it a lot, but how many of us actually do it?
Yeah, let's have each of you talk a little about where you are with mobility. What pilots do you have? What's sort of the 5-year rollout plan, if you have one? and what are some of the pitfalls on that? We talked about the CAC card PIF. That seems like a huge issue. So talk about where you are, where you're going, and some of the roadblocks that you seem to be seeing.
Yeah. So at PBGC, we're in the very early stages with mobility. We're really trying to focus on the business first. We're actually in the process of putting together a mobility center of excellence that'll be comprised of both the business area and IT. Because I think that's really key for the success, as was mentioned earlier, with the way some of the apps are being rolled out. But our biggest challenge has been the culture. A lot of our folks have been there for many years, and trying to infuse something like mobility and get away from BlackBerry. If many of you have ever been on BlackBerry and went to iPhone and then tried to go back to BlackBerry, it's a nightmare. I've been through that. But you really need to have some support from high up when you're doing this. They have to be able to really want to drive it with you. And you need to get some buy-in from the business units. Mobility I look at a little bit differently than some of the other technologies. You really do turn it upside down. It really does require, I think, more of the business buy-in, more so than the others.
Now, at SBA, we're similar things. It's we've had Citrix and VPN and remote work for quite a while with the telework and telecommuting. But it's we're deploying good, right? I mean whether or not that's just the product we have, but those sandbox. We're in the early stages again of looking at email as a service, collaboration as a service. Whether or not it's the vendors that are on that from GSA. But again, excuse me, getting out of I got to have MDM and I have to have complete control of the physical device and I have to have all that versus BYOD. We're working on our own BYOD policy, which is basically just taking and stealing from the toolkit online. And
I'll give you mine.
Yeah, So it's but the culture is not a technical issue anymore. Once I've talked to the CISO community and my CISO and said, hey, we don't need this really in-depth policy because we're talking about we're utilizing a container in a sandbox, not natively on the device and all these other things, right? So now it's general counsel and employee relations and union and all these other things, the culture that we have to do. So we're looking at BYOD as well. And then continuation in the app space, right? Not necessarily, we haven't been doing many standalone apps that you put on an iTunes or an Android store. It's much more, look, make this thing HTML5 or make a mobile version that's accessed on the web browser and whatnot. So we're going to continue to look at that. And again, 14 is not looking all that great, and 15 isn't either. So we're doing what we can with what we have. So that's what we're looking at. It's getting out of that old school thinking of I got to secure every single thing on. Sorry, I'm pointing at Luke, but every single thing in the BES server and all these other things, right? Versus, hey, if it's secure, etc. We're also we actually are piloting. I'll put it in that term, derived credential, and we're going to start looking at that again for mobility tied in with HSPD12 and logical access. So we're going to take a look at that and see how that plays in the mobile space. That's what we have on deck.
Yeah. So we're probably in a pretty similar place in DHS. Unfortunately, I think someone talked to the lawyers first about BYOD, so that is pretty much off the table.
Yeah, I talked to him second.
Yeah. But there's real concerns with what if a device gets compromised? Do you erase grandma's photos when you clean the device off? So there's some real interesting privacy and policy concerns, not as much technical. So that's sort of been punted to the side for a bit. The buzzword we're using internally is COPE, corporately owned, privately enabled, or personally enabled. So how can you take your official iPhone, your official BlackBerry, have the lockdown container, and you're able to do Yelp on the side. But if the device needs to be taken, it's a government device. You're signing away your rights when you start using it anyhow. It solves a lot of legal problems and still gives that flexibility. Doesn't save much money, but it's really unclear maybe if BYOD does. Once you start talking to unions and reimbursement, it's unsure if it may be cheaper or not. In the broader scheme, DHS is a very diverse place with a lot of different missions. So right now, I think there's maybe 15 different pilots or so really looking at different aspects, and these are done at the component level. So we have Coast Guard looking at how they can bring iPads onto their aircrafts, the C-130s, the helicopters, to do the digital flight bags. So they can take, instead of a 40-pound bag, they bring a 2-pound iPad, and those have been FAA approved. But very different, when you start looking at Border Patrol, a disconnected environment. They want to do biometric screening. They want to have access to personal information, keep watch lists, do sensitive data disconnected in a remote location. So very different use cases. So that's why I think right now we're sort of in the feeling out what are the different requirements for mobility across DHS. And I think the phase we're moving into next is more of a consolidated approach. Can we start looking at what's an 80% solution that would meet this diverse mission need? There's probably going to be, maybe it's 70-30, but there's always going to be sort of that corner case, especially in DHS, of things that can't be met with a consolidated solution. But I think we are, for budgeting reasons and also from the security side, trying to look at a consolidated approach. Right now, I think the majority of the pilots are using Good. I know a number are also looking at AirWatch. Through InQtel, through our pilot, we're looking at leveraging Mobile Iron. So we're looking at just a number of different approaches. They all have pros and cons. They have different flavors. I think where we're going to see is, and we also are leveraging Citrix to be able to get remote desktop on the iPad. I think we'll start seeing probably a push more for native interfaces, and the closer you can get to doing a native interface without a lot of lag. It's non-trivial to do securely, but I think that's where you're going to get the consumer push and the business push, but we'll see how that gets balanced. So it's exciting times ahead.
Well, the multinational world is a little bit different because we don't talk about security as much as we talk about containment. If 28 nations are equally trusted, the most common classification I see is NATO restricted, but it means restricted to the 28. So instead of focusing on security, I've been working with them on focusing on containment, which is something they very much understand. We're trying to keep that which belongs to the 28 within the 28, and looking at outside attacks. NATO has very, very little experience with external cyber attack. Because of the environment of collaboration and containment, they're not really looking. They're not looking at external attack. And the edge of the network is the human, just as it is here. The edge of the network is sitting in that BlackBerry. So it's just a completely different philosophical way of looking at what we protect and how we protect it.
Mobility is supposed to increase productivity, and I would think the majority of the pilots, or a lot of them, are email contacts. But what do you envision, or what applications do you see developing to increase the productivity within your agencies, within the mobility world? What are you looking at? What needs to become an application to improve business processes in your agency?
I think it's really those business, basic business functions. For example, at Pension Benefit, we're issuing pension benefits to the nation. What we're looking at is how can we take some of those labor-intensive applications that are old and antiquated and make them mobile, and actually get some of our workforce out there, more in a mobile environment. So I think it's going through a selection process, identifying what really makes sense beyond some of the basics around mobility that we're seeing now. How can you take that to the next level and actually go through a process of identifying key business applications that can be put on a mobile device? And there's a lot of, I think, good test cases right now around government, local, state, and federal, where we're starting to see some really good benefits around it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think looking at it from an SVA perspective, it's some of the normal things, better email access, better collaboration, better untethering from the desktop. But I think it's where can we find time motion savings for the workforce as well. So, for example, our Office of Disaster Assistance is doing up a mobile application for their loss verification process. So right now, they surge a workforce, for example, in Sandy. They have folks go out and have to be, not necessarily with the first responders, but into the disaster zone, asynchronous. And so they're out there. In the past, they've had a tablet of paper and they're doing calculations of, well, the business was here and the damage was here and et cetera, right? And then they go back, they take all these notes because they spend 8 hours out there in the zone. They go back to their hotel room or tent or whatever they have out there at the JFO, and then they transcribe that into their laptop, right? So you got transcription errors possibly, and they forget. So why not use a tablet form? Why not do an app that you can do on the spot? Then it synchronizes back, right? So that makes them more efficient, makes the fidelity of the data. At least you're not fat fingering too much, right? I mean, maybe on the spot, but you're not taking your notes from it's raining. You're on, who knows what's going on out there, right? So that's just an example. But I think, to tag on to Barry, it was, there's a lot of opportunities for those business processes to take mobile and just automation as well, but in a mobile spin on it. So I think that's a continuation of looking at that.
Yeah, no, I just echo what Chase was saying. I really think where we're going to see some of the clearest, easiest, quickest wins are not necessarily in taking stuff you're doing on your desktop and trying to make that mobile. I think it's really taking what you're doing on paper right now in the field and making that and bringing that onto mobile devices. We're still using lots of paper remotely, and people have to fill it out there, take it back, type it in. And especially when you have remote locations, it's often maybe a shared computer. You have one single computer, 20 agents who have to enter information, and they're just sitting around with overtime trying to wait to get this entered in. So I think the more you can bring that connection securely into the field, provide a way for them to start, entering this directly into whatever database or system, that's when you're going to get humongous gains. And I think, we might finally go paperless, but, we still at least have a better chance at getting a little further along those lines. And I think I know when Secret Service goes and does site surveys, they're using paper forms right now. They're working on digitizing that and being able to enter that directly into a mobile device as opposed to having to go back, type it into a keyboard after the fact would just make their lives a lot better. And you're going to get a lot of customer buy-in by doing that.
Barry, it's a darn good thing you went first because you're spot on. Coalition mobility's goals are achieving basic functionality across an environment where you have 28 different nations, which is almost like 28 different states. You can drive across Belgium in about 3 hours. But it's achieving just the basic functionality without even worrying about advanced applications.
Yeah, it seems like the mobility strategy now is just getting it up and running and secured, and let's see how it goes versus developing some type of business strategy to get whatever information and how that's going to play out over a period of time. I guess we're still in the early stages of that. Let's now sort of bounce to cloud and kind of give us your thoughts on where you are and what your strategy is moving forward in the cloud. What's in the cloud now? What are you planning on pushing out to the cloud? Shared services connected to that type of thing.
Yeah. So we're at a point where we have about 6 to 8 different applications right now that are using cloud services, I'll say. And what I've tried to do now is get my arms around an enterprise wide strategy, which you need to do. Otherwise, you're going to in an organization you're going to continue to see all these clouds pop up because the business units are not going to wait on the CIO or the CIO's shop. They're going to go out and do their own thing and get the ROI that they can benefit from. So what I'm trying to do now is identify a cloud, person on my staff, a cloud architect, if you will, to work closely with me. It's probably going to be someone out of the Chief Enterprise Architect's office, and then really build a cloud core team. Comprised of both the business unit and IT, and really approach it that way. But I can't emphasize enough the importance of the enterprise cloud strategy. It's got to be done. Otherwise, you're not going to really benefit from what cloud can really provide. So we're going through that process as we speak. I mentioned the SharePoint earlier. That's going to be our big first one out of the gate from an enterprise standpoint, and then email and collaboration tools after that. But I think one of the other points I wanted to make about cloud is it's always been about cost that you've seen since it came on the horizon. Well, it's cost savings. There is money that has to be laid out first, but we're also seeing a shift in some of those factors from not just cost, but value. What's the real value you're getting out of cloud, and also vendor trust as we put more and more emphasis on vendors providing, whether it be public, private, or hybrid clouds. The trust factor is really key, and you wouldn't think that, but I'd put it up there just as high as the cost. Also, I wanted to mention about the Inspector General's offices across government. They still really haven't bought into the whole cloud aspect. They are still very reluctant for many reasons. Even with agencies that are doing very well in the cloud space, the IG's offices are still very reluctant. They feel that they can't go and do the auditing and the physical touching of some of the things that they normally would do during a lot of their audits and findings. So that's another big hurdle that we'll eventually get over, but it's something that definitely we have to keep in mind as we get through this process.
And we're about in the same space as well. It's and it's funny, Curtis saying, that what was old was bad, now it's good, that type of thing. It's it's hosting. It's so I'm a big fan of federal private cloud, but it is a cultural change, not just IGs. It's our business community who, for some reason, still is hugging the boxes and the wires. So it's really, we're in early stages of trying to explore. We put in continued budgets for FDCCI, so Federal Data Center Consolidation. I have plenty of data centers that are data centers. They're land closets in an office building. I have a couple of commercial data centers, and then it's all over the place. So it's again, how do you get that seed money and that ROI to be able to do that? And then what is cloud? Right? Is it going to Amazon EC2, or is it just going to the GSA offering, or is it sharing with a sister agency? Right? I think that's also continuing to break down those barriers. DHS and law enforcement and others may be a little bit different state from air gapping, type of thing. But if I'm virtualized and it's secure, can I virtualize, with Barry? Right? I mean, it's now. Then you got to talk to the IG and the business community of, but we have credit and PII. Well, so do they. Can we share the same infrastructure in the same cloud and virtualize, right? So I think it's going to happen. It's just continuation of how do we fund that when you still have legacy investments and maybe old investments and antiquated and expiring from a refresh rate. But it's I got those racks and those servers. The biggest thing I think, and that's the help from the community. I think FedRAMP is going to help hugely, but help from the community. It's that brokerage and that transition state from my as is to to be. So I totally agree with Barry. As I'm setting up the same thing, a little bit of mini team of what's the architecture of this? What's the pathway operationally? Not great PowerPoints and great fancy pictures, right? But how do I get X floor space in these applications that I are running on multiple different old legacy code, old legacy OSs, hardware that I can't find the investment. So how do I get from there to here? And that's the biggest challenge, as well as just the cultural trust. I honestly agree. I totally agree. That's trust. When I showed up at SBA a year ago, I said cloud, and people flipped out. Now it's a little bit, just from a concern, and rightly so, because of the data and the amount of capital and the investments in the banking things that we in the grants that SBA does. But now it's a little bit more, okay, if it's secure, they start seeing the ROI, they start seeing those numbers, as well as the functionality. So it's continuation on that path as well.
Yeah, I'll continue on that. I mean, I think for us, it's really been about that control trust issue. And cloud is a pretty fuzzy definition. DHS is, one large organization with 7 equally large organizations under it. So for us, I think what really helped a lot of the movement we have right now is the data center consolidation. Each of the components all had their own data centers, multiple data centers. A while back, there was a push to consolidate this into, the minimum number possible. So right now we have 2 major data centers. We don't actually own and operate them. We lease them. So in some sense, that is some form of the cloud, be your whatever your definition may be. But what that push did was force the business units, the different components, to start looking at how they could, put the vital businesses, services into a consolidated space, sharing, the same center between ICE, Coast Guard, and figure out how they adjust their business processes to adapt to that. So there were, of course, growing pains. It didn't always work out as well. Some of the costing wasn't as rosy as we thought it would be. But in the end, it really worked on that control and trust issue. So what we're looking at now is, DHS is moving towards email as a service. In the headquarter units, we're in that, and we have it up and running. There's some growing pains at first, but now it's pretty seamless. Outlook just connects to, I don't even know anymore, someone's Exchange server out there. And Keith Trippey in the CIO's office has been leading this. They're also looking at going towards a workplace as a service, and this is really looking at how do we get out of the capitalization cycle of updating laptops, updating your Windows XP on the desktop. How can we start doing more thin client? Going back, it's old as new. How can we start doing the thin client and get out of that capital cycle and move to a much quicker, more rapid upgrade cycle? So you're just updating software on a server versus having to have a tech come out, touch eat laptop, update to Windows 7, and put a lot of money into that. So I think just that initial shift and sort of the acceptance and that letting go of control has made it a lot easier to start, it's paying dividends now down the road for us.
The watchword among the nations is commonality, and it's creating commonality of format, data format, of interface. Canada has actually been a model for English-French bilinguality to ensure that everything is represented correctly in both languages. And the real challenge with cloud in the European environment, which includes the EU, here in the US, we talk about public cloud, hybrid cloud, private cloud, and different layers of security and protection. Well, the Europeans have something called safe harbor. And the safe harbor statutes are trying to be applied to a cloud environment. In Europe, an individual's IP address is considered personally identifiable information, PII. So in tracing back forensics for a hacker or an adverse incident, you get to an IP address that can only be released by a warrant. And a warrant from either the national police force or from Interpol. So we're looking at how does safe harbor apply? And it's just as hard as applying FedRAMP or any other security standards.
I want to ask this one question, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience here. In conversations that I have with the SI community, we talked about earlier, and Barry, you opened up with it, asking the contracting community to be innovative and to be able to explore unique ways of solving these problems. But the acquisition process really slows that, I think, that down to a great extent. When it gets to procurement and potentially to release an RFI and RFP, we're looking at low price, technically acceptable in the most case. So you're responding exactly to the specs to hopefully come up with a great price and win the deal versus innovation. What are your thoughts on that? How does the contracting community attempt to be innovative when we're working in that kind of environment?
So I really put a lot of the onus there on whoever's driving the actual acquisition, whether it's a CIO shop or the business unit or whoever, combination of both. They really need to work closely with acquisition. I've seen time after time where something's thrown over the fence to the acquisition shop, and it's left there, and it kind of plays out to your point with the lowest price. If an acquisition's done right, if the person leading that on the government side has worked with industry, knows what they want, not necessarily knows the vendor they want, but knows the solution they want, and they work that through the system, they can get what they want and not have it be low price. And it takes extra work, but it can be done. And it takes some work on the industry side to be partnering in that true partnership with government to make it happen. And it doesn't always happen that way, but I've seen if it's really done right and you work it and it's important, it can be done right and it can work. But it continues to be a struggle. One thing I would say is, these contracts that can be gotten to quickly, some of the larger ones are really easy for government that can cut the time in half, like the NIH, some of the NIH contract, NITACs, SOUP, some of these others. They are really beneficial for us on the government side because instead of taking 9 months, we can cut that down to 3 or 4 months and save money and have people not working in the background on these large contracts. So I would definitely recommend that as well for companies to continue to try to get on these various contracts.
I actually have nothing to add to that. I mean, I totally agree with Barry. Honestly, nothing to add to that. That's exactly how I see things and how I've approached things. It really is. We can get to easy vehicles. I think it is the extra time, and that's the often most difficult thing. And kind of in leadership positions, either we're putting our own calories into it, or we got to make sure that it's not, is the BlackBerry working today, or is the printer toner filled. It's taking that time to work with the procurement specialist or your contracting officer, and quite often that doesn't happen. But you have to put in that extra effort. But when you do, it can work. You can push that and drive that. So I agree.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is the biggest challenge that I personally face on a daily basis. It's really challenging to work through procurement on a lot of these issues. We're a little different since we're an R&D shop. We're really more best value. We look at the person, the team, what their ideas they're proposing, how they're going to go about innovating essentially. We do have a vehicle called a broad agency announcement where we put our problems out there and have people come in with solutions. But it's still really a slog, especially when you're working with smaller and more nimble, innovative companies who haven't dealt with the government before. And I think, just realistically, there is a hurdle for just doing business with the government, and that is challenging in the R&D space because you do weed out some really great companies with great ideas because having a DAA audit, having the history in working in this space required is just a challenge for finding some of the smaller companies. So we found ways to get around this and work, through different, using some of the larger vehicles, using people like AFRL who have a really good contracting shop who are used to doing research contracting. But I think this is one of the bigger challenges, I think, for the government doing innovative research.
Well, again, my perspective is a little different, but it's not all that different. Procurement at NATO moves at the same speed that everything else at NATO moves at. And if you think the speed of government is slow, here, Barry says 9 months, shorten it to 3 months. And at NATO, we're trying to take 2 years and shorten it to 1 year. And in the same way, the U.S. focuses also on using vendors from small and disadvantaged communities. There's a variety of procurements. NATO, the coalition, tends to buy only from their members, and they try and spread that out amongst the smaller nations. And there is a terribly strong concern about United States domination, and we, the U.S., are very aware of it. So we try and help balance, but it's terribly, painfully long.
Questions opened up here. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you. My name's Patton Deemers. I have a number of questions, but I'll only ask one up front, unless nobody has any other questions. My first is on definition, I guess, because we all keep saying nobody knows what cloud is. It's at the same time, it's ubiquitous. And so when there's a need on the government side for cloud, it can come in many, many different forms. So is there a thought on how we can start defining it better so that the industry knows what you're actually looking for? Because cloud is not a technology, it's not a framework, it's nothing, right? It's a term that somehow has taken root, but it doesn't mean anything. And so if the government wants what's called a private cloud with virtualized servers of some sort, then that would help if that's what was asked for, as opposed to cloud, right? And I'll give a case in point. The State Department and their data center that they built out in Denver, right? It's been a big success and all of this, and there's lots of other space that the government could use, but there hasn't been a lot of takers for it for the federal cloud. And then the second part of this, is if the government did go to true clouds like Amazon Cloud, I'll call it, what about rollback or roll forward? So Curtis has mentioned a number of times we've come back full circle. Well, if we put all this data out there in the ether and the next great thing comes along, how do we take advantage of that when we're no longer in control of the data?
Well, there is a definition of cloud, and it's done by NIST, and it's used virtually worldwide except here. Because nobody here wants to read it, but it's used virtually by everybody else but us. NIST has had working groups chaired by Dawn Leaf and several other extremely bright people on cloud taxonomy, on use cases. There are new standards. I think it's SP 187, but I don't want to quote on that. But NIST has defined cloud not just for the government, but for industry, because NIST defines things in the U.S. for industry. It turns out the rest of the world is using it. It'd be nice if we read it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we need to do better in our procurements. Is it platform as a service? Is it software as a service? Is it hosting? Is it it's the definition. I mean, not that hosting's there, but you got those definitions, and we just got to use them. Quite honestly, I actually have read it, but it's been a year. So
Yeah, so I think Curtis hit it. It is the NIST definition, and we have to be a lot more explicit in the procurements exactly what we're looking for. As far as your second part of your question, I mean that's the future. I mean that's the crystal ball, right? I really see the hybrid cloud, not putting everything in one egg basket, but really coming up with something where hybrid will really be the future, where we won't just see public, we won't see private, but we'll see a combination of the two being used quite a bit.
But I think that goes into not only definitions, but as we write these contracts and service level agreements and data rights, and we still control and we're responsible for that data. But what's the format? What's the standardization that says if you are going to be platform agnostic, or future proofing? How do you move that more better? And we've seen that trend going with SOA, with XML, with all those things. But how do you do that? How do you roll forward?
Yeah, and I think even less than just future-proofing, how do you move from one contract to another? We haven't even hit that. So we're not mature enough to start switching cloud contracts, but what happens when you move from even just one cloud model to another cloud model? That's, a bridge we should start looking at before we have to cross.
Well, there's a whole science or art called information governance, and it tends to be the province of attorneys. But information governance is, where is your stuff? How is it controlled? Who has the liability? How is all those things shared? And that's also largely out and defined.
Hi, Holly from Harris. A couple of you have mentioned that you were planning to go to email as a service, email in the cloud. And we've seen some recent successes, and we've also seen some recent failures with agencies moving to their emails to the cloud. It's kind of thrown around as this simple task. Do you have an opinion as to how you plan to be successful, or how you're going to take the lessons learned and not be in that group that's failed and be in that group that's been successful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it comes down to plan. I mean, you really have to get everybody on board and not just be in a rush to get there in 2 months. It really has to be well planned out. You have to have the business units on board. You have to have the training in place. You have to have the support mechanisms when you run into issues. It takes a lot of planning. And I think some of the ones that haven't worked, I've heard, it got into some of those issues where they came up short. You know, they were able to move things over, but for example, they didn't think about some of the training issues, or they didn't plan on the distribution of data being in different places quite right, or synchronization issues. So you really have to plan these out, and you have to have just not IT leading it. It has to be the business units on the same page as IT in order to make it successful.
Yeah, I agree. It's never a Big Bang Theory. Yeah, let's pilot it, ease it into it, plan it out, and then roll. I think the thing that we're doing, I'm sure Barry as well, I mean, who is successful, right? You know, are we talking to lessons learned for those that have already done it in the last year or two? So that's what we're doing as well.
And you know, from the user side, I think one of the big things is communication. Like, let people know that your email will be a little slower tomorrow because we're moving your entire mailbox over, and perhaps before you do that, you want to get rid of some of your old emails, so we're not moving gigabytes of email that has to be now indexed, and your life will be better if you do this. So communicating that, working with the users so they know what to expect, and you know, I think plan, and don't be afraid to slip those plans if things start changing versus rigidly sticking to, we're going to deploy, people are going to fall down, but we're going to stick to the plan.
You guys got me there. My crew is 20 years behind on technology that's only 10 years old.
Little pine.
Hi, my name's Doug Austin. I'm with CSC, and I run our applied research lab in cyber, so I get accused of a little too much security sometimes. I'm curious what you feel is practical from your point of view with IT governance and information governance in mind. How much email would you allow outside of your border? We're not sure if good is good enough. We're not sure that Apple's going to start putting TPMs in their BlackBerries. I see yours up there. They're not going to put a TPM in that until the orders slow down, is pretty much what they told us. So how are you going to support that mobile device that may be in one of 28 countries or at home? And I think you're all probably under advanced persistent threats. It's just part of our landscape. What are you willing to let out of your office and onto that mobile device?
Well, so I mean, I'll jump in with some of the researchy side, and you know, the ivory tower view. But you know, right now I'm walking out with gigabytes of PST files on my laptop, connecting into Starbucks, trying to do a VPN to an Exchange server. It could be man in the middle with a little work. So I think it's probably taking a realistic view of what actual risk you're incurring. At the end of the day, this one I have, you know, the past 3 months of email physically on this device. The rest I have to go back to the server. So back to sort of that containment mentality, it's maybe sort of that realization that you're, you know, changing sort of the risk because there's actually less physically on the device, and maybe trying to focus on that secure channel. But there is, I think that's going to be the constant push of how much do you allow them to do, and then the flip side is if you're not giving them capabilities, how much are they going to figure out on their own? Because you're just going to shift people to using Gmail, you know, to get their PowerPoint onto a device that they can display when they're at a conference. They're going to find a way to do it. So you have to provide enough capability and do it securely, and that's not easy. So these guys know how to do it. I don't.
No, I agree from just from a, it's all risk-based. It's the users are going to send their PowerPoint to Gmail or other things. So we're not even using PKI for signing digitally, you know, signing our email, you know, now. So if you lock it down, you know, the standard security conundrum, right? It's, you know, we lock it down too much, folks are going to find a way around it, and they're not going to be able to, you know, utilize and do business. Don't lock it down enough. Then, you know, it's free range. But I think it's just continued risk-based defense in depth, looking at the risk and looking at your agencies or your particular business function. I mean, I don't have any classified information, but I got plenty of PII and corporate, you know, kind of data going through, and a lot of credit data. A lot of that's coming system to system, but you know, there's transactions going on in email. So I'm just trying to get to logical access. You know, better than somebody just sending it into the clear. So that next steps, and then hopefully there's easier technology that's coming out, better encryption, better containers, whatnot. So, you know, versus the BES server sitting in a foreign nation back in the day, right? I mean, so, you know, it's all kind of boots on the ground. It's, you got to balance that with your business operations, and what is true risk, and not just paper risk, but what is true risk balanced with the business.
No, I echo what Chase just said. It really does come down to the risk-based approach. and encryption, data at rest, data in transit. But users are going to find a way around it. If you lock things down too much, they will use personal email accounts. They will go around you. They'll find ways to do it. So you've got to balance it and still be able to meet mission needs.
And NATO, of course, looks at it from a completely different view. I have a NATO document right here in there, which is NATO unclassified. There's a release date on it and time. While an item is being discussed internally within the North Atlantic Council, which is the 28 ambassadors, it is not released. Once it's released, then it goes out to the 28 nations, and it's contained. It's all about containment. It's containing it before the document is released, and then after it's released, keeping it in the correct community.
Any other questions?
I guess my question
Oh,
as
one
a
second.
user, as a user who has multiple devices, whether it's my iPad, iPhone, mobile laptops, home laptop, etc., I want a hosted virtual environment. Do you see, based on the discussion we've had around cyber and mobile devices in 5 years, where we may be as users being able to access documents from our office, access personal documents
Absolutely.
and information?
Yeah, I think the virtual office will just keep growing with device size. They'll keep tweaking sizes to lightweight, but not too small that you can't read the document. So you're going to continue to see, I think, a lot of movement in that whole area of, how can we be as most productive as we can with as few as devices as we can, and print's the other thing that we haven't really talked about, but there are security and privacy issues with printing, and we've got to tackle some of those as well.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about BYOD, right? I mean, it's discussions we're having already just internally. So I agree, you're going to be moving that out there. But for example, I like keeping my life separate from work, because when I go on leave, this goes I go offline, I go dark. And there's plenty of folks that want that as well. Others are going to say, hey, I just want to have one device, and I don't care if it's my personal, my tablet. But I think we're going to have an interesting mixture in the coming years. But I don't think it's too efficient, and there's too much flexibility involved to be in, and it's too hard a barrier from a user perspective. I get it all the time. I got to get Citrix and RSA token, and which one works, and do I do desktop, and it's training issues. And even though it's gotten a lot better over the last decade, reducing that barrier so users, and especially next generation users coming into the workplace, how do we make things efficient and retain and recruit? So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's going to be driving us to offer new capabilities. I mean, the ease of just doing, Google Docs, the drive they have, look at Evernote, Dropbox, for better or worse, all of these different solutions. We're having people coming out of college used to working with those capabilities, using, you don't have to worry about what device your document's on. It's just there, and you work on it, and you pull it up, you stop, you work on another. That's going to be sort of the expectation we have to start living up to and providing capabilities that allow that, or else, again, they'll find a way to do it on their own, and it may not be the way we like it or is secure.
Oh, I'll go. Hello? Sorry, I'll go real quick. So we're talking about mobility, security, and cloud here. I'm curious about what your thoughts on overlaying that with the concept of governance, risk, and compliance as a big topic. There are 3 different topics within there, obviously, but just how does that overlay all of this to make sure that when there is something that's supposed to be done, that it's actually getting done and verifiable, whether it's from a technology aspect or a policy aspect?
Yeah. Well, that is the other side of the CIO job, is good policy and up-to-date policy, and policy that really is matching what you're trying to accomplish. And it's not the sexy part, but it's got to be done. And there's a lot of good guidance out there from NIST, OMB, that can be leveraged, and what other agencies have done. So I really kind of see that as the umbrella, the policy, and the governance, kind of being the perimeter, if you will, that's really needed, and what you can really come back and put your finger to when you have issues or you're trying to interconnect systems and so on.
Yeah, I agree. And the second part of that is then you got to have that good framework and those policies and those procedures and ConOps and all those good things. And then it's, okay, great, is that just shelfware, or how do you actually do either spot audits or automated tools, or to ensure that it's being adhered to? And I think the technologies out there and the tools that we have, whether or not it's network scans or 802.1, I mean, there's a bunch of stuff, and it'll continue. The technology is always changing, but if you don't have a good policy and a framework, then it's kind of hard. Then you're just kind of spot. So I think it's really, we'll keep hitting the planning, not just for planning's sake, but so at least what's your world and what are you trying to accomplish? What's your outcomes?
Yeah, I think sort of underlying all that is, what a lot of this is done at the system level. So you CNA a system. And I think, as we go about this, starting to think larger what system means these days. I think, looking at actually the MDM baseline they did, in looking at it's, the server that's running the software, it's also the stuff on the device, taking a broader view for system, not just one rack, it's a larger enterprise. So I think moving from system being, a technical thing to almost maybe a business process, and looking at your security and policy across that entire landscape and all the different technical areas it touches. But I think this is going to be the real tough spot.
Yeah, I think it's system.
It doesn't get enough attention.
It's back to systems engineering.
Yeah.
Not just the system engineered, systems engineering.
Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Mike Douglas from Capital Connections. I'd just like to switch gears for a minute and talk a little bit about business process. Scott asked a question earlier, about apps that improve productivity and business processes and stuff. After having been in the government for a long time, where I never thought about, how many hours one spends on something. There's always more hours in the day, right? And then went into business, and in business, it was all about billable hours, and so we started spending a lot of time realizing how many hours one spends on a project. And most of you, as CIOs, think in that terms of having a help desk or a IT shop that is a PMO or something like that. But I don't see that a lot in government, and so my question really is as we think about improving business process in government. Is there a mindset that's willing to adopt more of a billable hour mentality, of a track, not just an FTE spending 8 hours a day every day doing one thing, but if your administrative assistant is also spending 2 hours of her day doing something, what is the value of that 2 hours, and are we keeping track of it? So timekeeping, program management, resource management, what is the move towards that?
Well, I got a great example of that. I mean, it's I come to the SBA, and we're doing timekeeping on papers. I mean, there's a SharePoint workflow, but there's timekeepers. How many timekeepers versus WebTA on automated system? What's the time motion savings alone, and what could those individuals be doing during those hours each 2 weeks when they're doing and collecting signatures and leave slips and all these other things? But I think my opinion is the biggest thing, and it comes more to kind of mentorship and or training to both the IT staff and others. I think it's whether or not, it doesn't matter the technology, whether or not we're talking cloud, client server, it doesn't matter the technology. In my opinion, what I found over the last couple of decades, it's trying to get the business folks not just to recreate that form into an electronic format, right? It's our jobs to help, in industry's job to help say, look, here's the art of the possible. You don't have to do this. I mean, if you want to do that, that's great, but you're not going to get much return on the investment. You're not going to get any time motion savings. You're not going to get much efficiencies. You're just recreating that form from a paper to Adobe. So it's our jobs, I think, to put that in the mix in the relationship building with our business customers to say, hey, look, here's what you can do. IT shouldn't be driving the boat, but IT should be driving that says, here's what your opportunities and flexibilities that you may not know about, administrative assistant who's been there 30 years, and that's a cultural change, but I think that's our job as well, is to kind of put that in the mix, and whether it comes from a governance angle when you're sitting at a budget table going, here's $1 million project. What is this supposed to be doing? Why are we just recreating this form? Why don't we do X? All the way down to you're on an IPT, an integrated product team, and you have a project manager who's cost, schedule, scope, but when the requirements is definition stage, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities we just don't take enough advantage of, I don't think.
Yeah, I would agree. And you're absolutely right. The government doesn't do a very good job having just come out of the private sector. We don't. And, the old buzzword in government 15 years or so ago was business process reengineering. And, that was a big buzzword, right? But today, I think some of the factors, though, that are driving it are the budget, that are causing us to think smarter and much more like business, and OMB. OMB's gotten a bad rap over the years, but I have noticed coming back in that they are making some leaps in the right direction. Is it perfect? No. But they are trying, things like portfolio stat, which we mentioned earlier. They are forcing agencies to think smarter. When I first got to PBGC, my staff was like, well, we're a small agency. We really don't have to do portfolio stat. And I said, well, time out. We're going to do portfolio stat. It's the right business decision to do. And when you evaluate these new systems, you really do need to look at the processes, because I think that's where we really fall short. And just, again, the technology is the easier part. It's really looking at the people and the processes and how you can really get those efficiencies and cost savings.
I think it depends on sort of the makeup of your agency, too. We have lots of contract support staff. And, one of the challenges, it goes back to the contracting, is are you putting in a good enough contract that allows for that flexibility, the change in business processes, that allows for, the general intent to stay the same, but maybe the procedures to change down the road. But I think, sort of echo what Chase was saying, I really sort of see the CIO shop really coming in and helping on a lot of this. I think hopefully down the road they really come in and more on the information side. How can you collect information more efficiently? How can you work with it better? How can you get more intelligence out of that information, and really being able to provide different approaches and techniques and being able to sort of set up the systems that help businesses do things more efficiently. I know one of the challenges, on the R&D side is working with operational components and trying to get sort of their requirements out and not necessarily just meet what they're looking for. They may just want a new button here, but look at what they're really trying to do and provide better tools to enable them to do that. So to help sort of make that leap. And I really see that's where CIO shops are going to be coming in and saying, we have this new technology, you probably haven't heard of it, but it will get your job done quicker, better, and have that trust there for them to say, yes, let's take our business there, and I know you'll make it better and quicker.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Good morning. This is Jing Shao with Booz Allen. A question. Many contracts, infrastructure-related contracts, are released under the firm fixed price contract vehicle. There are challenges in, for example, estimating multi-year, 5-year value with Amazon Web Service. Do you have any thoughts on the ideal contract vehicle for cloud work that encourages innovation and more performance and service level based?
Yeah,
that's a tough one. I mean, from a contracting standpoint, obviously firm fixed price is easier for us to manage. It's usually more cost effective, and having been on the other side and provided contracts and written contracts and proposals, I know they're tough, especially when you want the work and you may have to give some hours along the way and be negotiable when it's firm fixed price. But I think it's an area that it's kind of new ground still. We're still with cloud and where it's at. I think GSA has done some good things. I think DHS in trying to lay some of the groundwork and working with GSA and DHS, the whole movement around the contracts. I think they've broke some grounds, but we're still feeling our way, I think, through that.
No, I agree with Barry. Especially the whole earlier contention on cloud is pay by the drink and be able to dial up, dial down, all these things. And if the contract vehicle is too firm fixed price, then how do you on the business side how do you do that? I think we also continue to struggle on the federal side of defining what is our SLAs, right? What is it uptime? Is it outcome based? Is it I just need rack space and floor space? So I think that's you hit it on the head. It's a difficult thing to do. Versus some things we've been talking, at least in my area. And again, it's an education process and relationship and trust building process with the contracting officers, and then they turn over, of course. But can you have a kind of a hybrid vehicle where you have some that is kind of T&M and where you're feeling that out or dialing up and down, and then you move into the firm fixed price? I mean, how can we get creative a little bit on the contracting side without just being, I want to pay this and that's all I'm going to pay, but I expect you to do everything, and I want to scale up and down whenever I want, but I just want to pay that price. I mean, that's I hear you. Don't have a good answer, but I hear you.
I think we're going to wrap it up here. It's about time, I think. I want to thank the panelists here, Barry, Chase, Luke, Curtis. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you for your time. And I want to thank immixGroup, and I want to thank CA for sponsoring this. And stay tuned for our next breakfast. I'm not sure when that's going to be. November 14th. So you'll be getting an invitation for that. Thank you for coming, everybody.